All right. Here's Amy Klinger talking about in light of recent events, and you can start us off.
Yeah, I'm super excited for everybody to be here. This is a book that was a long time in the making, and I'm thrilled that it's out in the world and that people are actually reading it. It's just been such a fun and exciting experience. So I'm open to answering any questions and hearing your thoughts, and um, yeah, thanks for being here for sure.
Amy, can you give us a little background what inspired the novel?
Um, it started with the two main characters. It feels like a million years ago. I was part of a writing group in Burlington. I'm based in Vermont, and so Burlington had a weekly writers group, and we would just do little short exercises. And these two characters, who eventually became Audrey and Pooter, kept kept coming back and coming back, um, and over that time period, I was working in multiple office environments and sort of filing away the absurdities of that culture, and moving along and um finding my people along the way. And it just stuff kind of flowed into the story, and it took it, like I said, it was a long time coming. I was um working, and I had my daughter, and so I was really only writing sometimes for an hour and a half, a few times a week. And so it was a story that just kind of grew out of those experiences, and then some absurdities thrown in, and uh, some community background stuff. I grew up in a small town in New Jersey, very much like the one that Audrey grows up in, and by our big claim to fame in our town it's where James Gandolfini grew up, and he was sort of the tangential inspiration for Jamie, and this idea of that celebrities come from places. Because I remember being a little kid and going to Friendlies, and there's James Gandolfini working the Friendlies behind the counter, and he had this long wispy hair back then that was obviously went away pretty when he got older, but we used to call him the guy with the flyaway hair, and we sort of watched his career progress. And so there's a passage in the book where I talk about how the town kind of owns a piece of that person. They claim him as their own. And you go back to the town now, and there are buildings named after him. I think the main street is called James Gandolfini Way. And I just found all these pieces of different parts of my life that felt like they had a home in this book, um, even though it's wholly fictional. There are certainly pieces that came from parts of the real world.
Yeah, wow. So are those the only characters that came from like that? So those aren't real, that wasn't like any real experience, right? Those were just characters that kept popping up, right?
Yeah, they were characters, although certainly the dynamic between Audrey and Pooter is one that I've experienced before. And Pooter is sort of very much an amalgamation of many people that I've worked with, and I'm sure that they recognize parts of our scraps of conversations, and things from our real lives, but no, it is wholly fictional. Um, and Yeah, I mean, to me, it's always fun to play with those, to pluck those pieces from the real world and use it as scaffolding to build a story around. So um, that's very much where these people came from.
Mhm. So when it comes to like the workplace kind of environment, was your goal to be relatable, or did you just personally relate to like what the kind of dynamics that they had going on? Um,
I think there are a lot of universalities in that kind of environment. Particularly in those corporate environments where you've got the rigid structures of physical space. You've got cubicles, you've got who's got an office with a door, who's got an office without a door. And that environment feels really universal. Like I said, I worked in a lot of different places, and you could always, in those first few weeks, you you really don't realize how much you absorb the culture, and you subconsciously navigate your way about who you can talk to, who you can't talk to. And I particularly found that space of middle management to be really interesting, because it's like being the middle of anything. When in the sibling order, you've got the youngest and the oldest, but the middle child feels like they're in kind of this no man's land. And I think that's very much the space with middle managers too. They've got just enough responsibility to have some control over their life, but then they don't fit in with the people that they used to be friends with. It's this awkward dynamic. And I think from what I've heard from other people and from my experiences at different places, it felt pretty universal, universally absurd and universally comforting in a way, I think.
Yeah, I would definitely say so.
It's interesting that this has suddenly become a period piece,
Yeah.
in that the whole workplace environment has completely changed. I don't know that this novel would exist now. This story would not exist in today's workplace.
Yeah, no, it's true. I have not worked in an office setting since 2019. And I probably will never go back.
Mhm.
And there are things that I miss about it, but most of it I do not miss.
Yeah.
Well, along those lines too, I wonder, reading that period, the audience for this book, because now everybody's got cell phones, so the whole media coverage of the celebrity would have been different as well. So I wonder about the audience too.
Yeah, I know I have my nephews are in their 20s, and they both read the book, and they thought it was very quaint. They're like, oh, you guys with your Xerox machines and water coolers and whatnot. And I thought, yeah, they are antiquities now. Like it's I wouldn't expect, other than sort of the curiosity factor for a younger generation to be able to connect with the book in that way.
Except for the relationship part, I think. Sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to say, how do you have an affair with your boss if you're not? I mean, no, seriously, this is, I think that's one of the things that really pins this book to a place and a time. It never occurred to me until we just started talking about it. But yeah, how do people have affairs with their bosses anymore? How would Audrey would never have met him except in Zoom, which is not particularly sexy. I'm sorry.
Present company accepted, of course.
Yeah, of course. I would just like to.
It's a very fair point. My daughter is leaving. She's been living in Columbus, Ohio. She's about to move to the DC area, and she doesn't know anybody. And she's going into a work environment where she's going to be home most of the time, and she won't really meet anybody. And how do you don't want her to have an affair with her boss, but how do you how do you interact? I mean, how do you develop relationships? I mean, the Audrey Pooter relationship would never would have been considerably harder. Would be considerably harder to do now than it was then.
Yeah. I also feel like it's hard for people like in their 20s to like early 30s to really meet a lot of people along the same lines of age, because my sister has been living in Atlanta for 4 years at a couple of different jobs, and she never knows anyone that's really her age in any of these jobs. So it's really hard to make friends. She's made like 2 friends living there for 4 years, and like going out trying to meet people, but like it is so much harder now. And like without a workplace dynamic that has like, and half of her jobs have been like half remote for most of the week, so the other half, like it's not a lot of like workplace company kind of get together kind of stuff, versus I feel like there's a lot more of that like 5 years ago, 5, 10.
Yeah, that's interesting to think of it in terms of the workplace as the social framework. I mean, who would have thought that that even as a possibility. You know, you go to work and but there are all these social connections, and I miss that. I work with a group that most of us are virtual, and I will never have that kind of close, fun the way that you process the information that comes down in pieces, and it's it's a loss for sure. I'm
Yeah.
glad I experienced it when I did.
Well, and a lot of people like a lot of my friends that are not in remote jobs, they always tell me that they can't imagine working a remote job because they wouldn't have any like company culture. Which like I've never really thought of it that way. I'm like, remote's pretty good, but but it's just really interesting how like there's two sides of the coin. Like some people really want that workplace like experience, and then some people just could not care less. And it's really interesting to me how like that dynamic goes too. Like I make more friends working in like waitress jobs only because that's usually like my age group, you know, as opposed to a lot of other places. Like you're going to meet a lot of people that are like, yeah, you can be work friends with them, but not really anyone you'd hang out with outside of work like Hooter does.
So yeah, it's fun because I know that you wrote this novel pre-pandemic, so so that was not the reason that you chose to set it when you did. But what was the inspiration for setting it when you did?
Um, my feet were so squarely grounded in that world. And to me, in some ways, it was a love letter to that time period. Not consciously at the time at all. But Sylvia, you're right. Like in this connected world, like there was something I really didn't want about that connectivity. And I actually did try. When I was first shopping the book around, I had talked to a couple of agents, and they said, setting it in the 90s is a kiss of death. You should change that. And I tried. Like I really looked at the book and I thought, okay, well, how can I make this work? And I was so enamored with that time period and that place. And I thought, well, if it doesn't find a home, it doesn't find a home. So this is the story. This is where I want to tell it, and this is how I want to tell it.
I think
Yeah.
one of the things that really pinned that time was the whole section that takes place at the book convention, which I mean, having been to BEA a few times and other book conferences, I really enjoyed that. I am curious actually to hear why you kind of switched into Puda's whole little subplot there. What was your thinking on that? But I could just I could smell the stale coffee. I could hear the din. It was really well depicted, at least to somebody who's been through that. So
yeah, that world was very ripe for. I've been to lots. I've never been to a book related trade show. I've been to oil and gas. I mean, my career has taken me all over the place. I've been to oil and gas industries. I've been to like power conferences and transportation and they're all cut from the same cloth. It's just felt really right. I did not. I had originally written the story strictly from Audrey's point of view, and as I started, spending time with all the other characters, particularly, I felt like each of the male characters had just a small piece that I wanted to give. I wanted to showcase their perspective and world for. And so, Pooter obviously gets the biggest because he's a larger than life character in a lot of ways. But also for Jamie to have some glimpses into his world, and also, in the end for Dan's ultimate downfall. It was just something that I wanted to do. And I had readers say, you really, I don't know if you should do that. And again, it was the same thing where I said, I hear what you're saying, and I still want to do it. I still want to give their stories just a little bit of voice.
Yeah, as someone who has never worked in an office, I really kind of understood what it was. I mean, like working in a 90s office, which I personally am very enamored by, like the culture of the 90s, even though I was not alive for like 9 years of it. But I just like I don't know, it was just like a different time, and I personally like the idea of like less technology and everything, even though obviously there's pros and cons, but like being able to kind of be there in a setting. Like sometimes I feel like when authors write, like as like right now with all the technology that we have, it feels like a little watered down, even though it's accurate, like it's pretty truthful, especially like TV shows and stuff, but it just blows my mind to watch that kind of stuff and like read those things, and like the fact that I should like I connect to it in a way like it's relatable, but I feel like it's not something that I like as much as reading about things that are going on like pre like the big technology push.
Yeah, it's interesting that the book that I'm working on right now is set probably 2015, 2016. And I just feel annoyed at having to like write texts and to, do virtual video, like it has to be part of the story because that's real life. But it definitely, it has its place, but it also feels like a bit of a burden to, you know, to be as connected as we really are in the real world.
Yeah, but I think even adding um, technology parts of the story, your magic with this book was the relationships. Those don't change.
Yeah.
I would
I
agree.
mean,
I find it would be like it would be hard to imagine this book if you had updated it to have it kind of like, in the 2000s, or like it's just the setting is so integral to the story and the relationship and the characters. It just all plays so well together. So I'm glad you dug your feet in and kept it in the 90s office. I was wondering if you found it challenging, since you wrote it over like a longer period of time, to maintain that mindset, because so much changed, right? Especially with the like kind of Me Too dynamics, and technology, and just the things were already starting to shift probably before the pandemic just dropped a bomb kind of in the office workplace. Did you find it hard to kind of maintain the mentality or the integrity, I guess, of that original 90s office setting as things were shifting, or had you spent enough time and immersed in that environment that it was just maybe harder to adjust to the changes than it was to just keep the vibe flowing, I suppose?
Um, I think it was so formative. Those years were so formative for me. Like it really was that transition. I had my first email account at my first job. And, I remember people who would never give up their paper Rolodexes because, it was this space of transition. And I think it was so imprinted on, on me and my experience in the workplace that the story was so rooted then it wasn't hard. It really wasn't hard to sort of tune out some of the more modern stuff, because this story, it was almost packaged in a box in a time capsule. So that was the space that I got to play in.
I'm curious as to why these obviously dim-witted agents thought that the 90s was an era that would be the kiss of death in your story. Did they give you any reason? I mean, I'm, this is what people issue these edicts. Oh, you can't. Oh, you can't price your book here. Oh, you can't. But I mean, I I I spent more than 1 year in the 90s, Liz. I actually lived the whole 90s. Um, but no, I mean, I think every era, if you make it come to life, which you really did in this book, I loved going back to that era. I loved being in there. I mean, I don't read a lot of historical novels, and I'd hate to think that the 90s is now considered historical. But I always told my kids that history is whatever happened before I was born. But I thought it was a great era, and it brought back a lot of memories for me. So I'm glad you just tuned all that crap out, but I'm wondering if they could possibly explain the rationale.
I think at the time, I mean, we're talking, this was again probably 2018. It may have felt not far enough away. I don't really know. I think now things have changed so much that it really is a stark contrast. And so now it feels like a very different world, whereas then there may not have been enough distance. I don't know, Lou, you seem
Well,
to...
there was definitely, and I have to say that I shared some of this. There was a sensibility that if you didn't have a really strong reason to set something in the recent past, that you should set it in the present. That was a sort of conventional wisdom, kind of publishing, book selling. There's cooking happening outside and it's not going well. But but I think, I've only recently sort of revised that sensibility, because my feeling was, for the longest time, if you're going to set it 10 years back, what's the point? Why do that? Unless there was like a specific event that happened 10 years ago that had to be covered. Why would you do that? But I think what we've come to realize is, even the idea of setting the next novel in it's 2015. 2015 is a million years away. Think about what's happened since 2015. And I think, at this point, that notion that you shouldn't set books in the relatively recent past. I'm not thinking about it as historical, BK. I just can't. But if you're going to set a book in the recent past, there sort of has to be a reason for doing it. But the recent past by itself has become the reason for doing it, because of how quickly things keep changing, and how much. I mean, there's almost nothing that happens in this novel that could happen now. I mean, that's shocking to think about. It's not that long ago.
And even basing a book like right now or like a year ago, like there's like politics to it. So you kind of can't write the book without getting into the politics a little bit, or just completely acting like COVID didn't happen in like this book's life world, and it's like, I feel like that's a really hard dynamic to go around, because so many people are so polarized on it that they might choose not to read a book because someone wore a mask in it. Like, you never know. So that kind of stuff is really interesting.
Yeah.
You just have to tune that out and write the story that is inside you that you need to tell. I mean, you just have to say, okay, if having a character wearing a face mask is going to turn off that reader, I'll lose that reader. That's it.
Yep.
But I mean, I don't know about where everyone else lives, but around here you can find, reruns of The Office on every night. It's always someplace. People love that the Office family. I mean, it's any story, and I mean, those go back to Mary Tyler Moore Show. I mean, it's a classic trope is the Office family, and and that's what you're dealing with here, especially because Claudia's relationship with her own family is up and down. She's that much more dependent on her Office family for stability, and in case of Dan, for love, and in case of Pooter, for friendship. I mean, because she doesn't always get along with her sister, and her father's off marrying this woman. So the office was her important her primary family in many ways, and it's very sad that we've lost that, but
yeah
but it's still, don't forget Bridget.
I find the Office family such an interesting concept too, because you're kind of like forced to spend such mass amounts of time with these people, and you create relationships with them that always have this sort of, I don't know, not disingenuine, but like you kind of wonder, right? Would you be friends with this person outside of this situation? And when it seemed for a while that like Pooter had screwed her over, I was like, oh no, like they weren't real friends. It was just kind of an Office thing. but then that turned out not to be the case. But I've personally experienced with like sort of the office opportunity dissolving, a lot of the people that I spent a lot of time with, you know, we've grown apart because we didn't have that common ground to keep us together anymore. And then you wonder, you know, like how much of the relationship was just getting by because, you know, you have to be sitting next to this person for 8 hours a day, or how much was it like true connection? It's just a really interesting dynamic to me, and one that probably newer generations just won't ever really experience. I guess if you replace that with like utter loneliness, it's perhaps not better, but or isolation of working in your own virtual space, but it's just very interesting to me.
I feel
And
like
we can't we can't forget the lunch hour. You know, the lunch hour was a thing. I mean, it's like who's going to go, who's going to be in the group, who's going to be in the clique, who gets to, you know, head out
A lot of
together.
drama.
It really is. It really, well, it really was. Yeah, yeah, it was. And, you know, and then Friday nights, everybody would go to TGI Fridays after work and have a drink, and who stays all night and who goes after one drink. And it's a lot. It was a lot.
Well, I feel like the workplace dynamic is kind of mirrors like school in a way, because your friends, you're probably mostly friends with the people you're friends with because you're with them for 8 hours a day. Same thing with college, like maybe not with them in the same classes, but the same dorm or something. And then it's expected that that dynamic goes from childhood to college to a real job. And that like, so that you kind of have structure throughout your life if you stay on the path of having a job in an office and being able to do that kind of dynamic, which I find really interesting because I don't think I have more than like one or two friends that work in an office. And yet like they don't have like a company dynamic where they go out to drinks with their coworkers or anything like that. Like, and most of the time it's like one young person and a lot older people. So it's a really hard dynamic for them to be able to go out to like a 20-year-old going out, grab drinks with like a 55-year-old like after work. So it's like an interesting dynamic because I think that they can definitely be friends and have like a work dynamic relationship, but then outside of work it feels like there's like too much of a disconnect. Like they'll be going home to their family versus the younger person probably wouldn't be doing that. So it's interesting how much things have like changed too.
Or there's
I got
like this boundary of professionalism, right? Where you're like, how much of my true self can I be, and or how much do I need to kind of maintain this like workplace presence or like professionalism among these people? It's yeah, it's a fine line.
Oh yeah.
but I got the impression that Audrey hired Pooter for more, or for not because of his skill set or his brilliance in being an assistant who could, you know, take care of everything for her. I mean, there was she picked somebody who was as much of a slacker as she was because she wanted some kind of other relationship beyond just having a sterling assistant who could make her look fabulous in front of her bosses. I mean, then she was looking for something personal there, not romantic or sexual, but something personal was why she chose him, I felt.
Yeah, I think that's very true. The you know, I think it was interesting. I had a conversation with someone who read the book who said, you know, on the surface, it seems like Audrey is just going along with things, but she actually makes very clear-eyed decisions, that she hires Pooter, that she does pursue this relationship. And I thought, I guess there's some truth to that. It wasn't something that I was aware of. I really thought of her as someone who was just kind of going along with the flow. But when this person raised that and I started picking things apart, I thought, you know, she is calling some of her own shots more than I had originally expected her to, or thought she did. And Pooter was one of those things. She handpicked him to be part of her work culture, in a culture where she didn't really fit in.
But it was also a place where she had control, and because in her personal life with her family, she was squandering after the death of her mom. You know, I feel like that was her place where she actually had some control.
Yeah.
Yeah. I found it interesting, the like slacker kind of dynamic too, because it kind of reminded me of like the parallels going on pretty much like right now with the whole like quiet quitting dynamic that is like huge. Except the difference is you wouldn't call it quiet quitting back then. You'd probably just call them being a slacker, when in reality she's doing her work, she's getting it done, but she's just not going above and beyond, which is kind of the whole point of quiet quitting, because you kind of learn when you grow up, if you do the work, if you do the best that you can possibly do, like ABC, like you're going to work your way up. Whereas a lot of people want, a lot of like bosses and such would prefer to keep you where you are because you're doing so well in that position, that they don't want, they'd rather hire someone else for like that, someone else that can do whatever higher up position, as opposed to like improving someone's circumstances to get them to that higher position. Which I feel like when I was growing up, I was expecting like this kind of chain of events, but hearing about like the quiet quitting dynamic kind of made me believe, I think that things have changed in the workplace even more so now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very true in these corporate environments where, you know, they have layoffs and you see people you've worked with just let go. I think it has an impact, and I won't deny that that was part of my experience in seeing friends come and go and realizing that a company wouldn't hesitate to get rid of me at any point, and so your investment becomes a little bit different, and I think that filtered through in the book for sure.
Yeah, and that's a good point about like bigger corporations too, because I feel like right now where we're at, corporations are so big and technology plays such a big role that to them, you're just a number as an employee. Like you're not like a full-fledged like like helping the company. You're just a number that they need to cut, like Elon Musk cutting half of the like people at Twitter. He was just going numbers. And versus that wouldn't really happen very much in the 90s. I feel like they go through more frequently and will decide based on how well someone worked, not based on, all right, we need to cut this many positions, you know. And it's more of like a family that they don't want to get rid of people, as opposed to it's not as close-knit relationships now.
Yeah, and that might be the nature of the technological different distance too.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, that's a really good point. I think that, you know, the lack of personal connection, or the lack of you know, physical personal connection, you know, probably does have an impact on that. You know, and maybe it's easier to downsize now. I remember the one time that I had to do a significant downsizing, it was excruciating. I mean, you know, I knew these people. I knew what, you know, what was at stake, and and it was a lot. It was it was when I was at Bantam, and we cut about 20% of the workforce, and it was just devastating to have to do it. Now, I'm sure it was even more devastating to hear the message, but you know, I think there's a whole lot less of that now. And, you know, my son-in-law works for Google, and he just went through the you know, the downsizing that happened there, and you know, and I think his experience was very different from mine, in terms of, you know, breaking the news. It's kind of just not the same experience anymore.
I remember, you know, being places where the people next to you would just be, they'd have boxes and they'd just be packing up your stuff, and everybody's just, you know, you just put your head down, and it's the most awkward, unnatural. Oh yeah, they were horrible. Someday I'll mine that territory too, because it's raw when the people around you, or you know, when you're the person who's staying and the person next to you is packing up their stuff and leaving and being escorted out the building. I mean,
oh wow.
Yeah. So
I worked for a newspaper, and so I kind of missed all this because I was in a union, and I had a lot of seniority in the union, and they wouldn't cut me for anything. You know, I was safe. I was totally safe, and all my friends were safe. The only people who got fired were people who weren't in the union. So I missed all that. It all went right over my head.
I feel like that's why so many companies nowadays are very anti-union. because they want to be able to do what they want to do and not have anything else affect it. Whereas like I feel like the unions came very, very in handy. And now that they've kind of been like mostly not all phased out, like obviously there's still a lot of unions, but like you don't hear about people being in unions as much anymore, which is unfortunate.
Amy, I'm curious about one thing I really loved about this book is that there's no real sense of judgment about Claudia having an affair with a married man who's her boss. I mean, it just seemed to be there was no authorial voice hinting that this was not a nice thing to do, that she was not a nice person for having an affair with Dan. And I like that. I really like that. But I'm wondering if you want to talk about that a little.
Yeah, it was definitely something that I thought long and hard about, and I know that there have been readers that it will never sit well with. And I thought, I mean, there's a line in the book where Audrey says affairs happen all the time. Like, how, if that's not a natural part of the human experience, then why does it happen so often? And that was really where the territory where I was coming from. I can honestly say I have never had an affair. I don't know the power dynamics and those kind of relationships, but I know plenty of stories. And so to pretend like people are either good or bad didn't seem like the right, for having an affair on either side of the equation didn't feel like the right place for me as the author, especially because, it's Audrey's point of view. She's, I think she's too pragmatic to think in terms of like, I'm damning myself by being in this relationship. She's, she's along for the ride with it, just as well as any other things. But I didn't feel like, I think it's a part of the human experience, and there's a lot of inherent drama in it. So of course I'm going to push into that territory.
I feel like
it was really cool that she's not sitting there tormenting herself about, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. Oh, he's married. Oh, I mean, you just completely blew that off, and it was very refreshing. I mean, I have read other books in which somebody's having an affair with a married man. It was more that he was married than that he was her boss, although that was questionable also. But she just this was something. It was one area where I felt she did really have some control over her life. She was making a choice because, as we used to say in another decade, if it feels good, do it. And it felt good, so she was doing it. And it was so refreshing because, again, I have read books in which, the heroine may have an affair with a married person, but, oh, she's tormented about it. She feels guilty about it. Oh, she shouldn't be doing this. And you just like completely avoided that, which was really nice.
Except Pooter doesn't. Pooter is not okay with it. Pooter.
No, but no, he isn't. He's like the voice of morality in there, which is kind of funny given the sort of person he is.
Yeah. And didn't it also feel like, Bridget had to know. Bridget had to know because, when you've worked in offices, everybody knows everything. So in my mind, I was like, Bridget knows. She totally knows.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she was, she's the one that knows everything. And turned out to be kind of a hero in the end for her. But I find it interesting, too, that every time Audrey goes out to dinner, she has to go somewhere far away where they have to keep their heads down when they order because she doesn't want anybody to know who she's with, either Dan or Jamie. It's like, this poor girl just needs to go out to dinner. Look the waitress in the eye, tell her what you want, and let your partner tell them what they want.
I think you did a good job with putting in like Pooter's voice of reason too, and I think that's kind of what makes anyone that like is very against the affair, and like obviously like most people would be against affairs in the first place, but like people that might take it to heart, like that it's not really acknowledged by Audrey that she's really doing anything bad. But I feel like when Pooter said like that having an affair is not hard at all, like it's the easiest thing in the world, but it's hard to be faithful. Like I thought that did a really good point of like putting home what the affair kind of means to the novel. And I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, Peter's coming from a place where he's dealt with the fallout of his parents' bad marriage, and so or you know, of staying together when maybe people shouldn't. But he's definitely got some baggage there.
Yeah. Does anyone else? I was just gonna.
I wanted to say something real quick before
Good.
I forget, because I was talking to my husband about this the other night. So last month, Lisa, I think you remember when I said I'd be reading and the chapters were really short and they were quick, and I would turn the page and, oh, good, only 2 more pages. I'll read another chapter. I'll read another chapter. And then the next thing I knew, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. And on the other end of the spectrum with this book, I felt like every chapter, until it got to the end when it started to snowball, every chapter in the beginning to me was like a little vignette. They were perfect. They were just little perfect chapters, longer. And I didn't want to turn the page. I wanted to close the book, think about the scene, and then pick up the book again for the next scene. It was a whole different reading experience from last month. It was beautiful. Both of them were great, but it was just such a different feeling.
I agree. I vibed with the longer chapters here because I felt like it was transporting me sometimes to like a different little piece of this book's world. And I loved the way I thought your writing was just gorgeous throughout. It really drew me in, and I liked the way each of your chapters kind of like ended too, like on a little bit of like a thoughtful note. And I know as a writer that's really hard to do, so I was like, props to that. But I would reflect after, and I would think about it, and then kind of like start the new chapter, and it felt like it was almost like a new kind of aspect of the book, which I really liked. Versus like sometimes, which I try to do, like you're stringing people along, and this felt like you were giving time and attention to like people and places and relationships, and I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's tricky. I learned a lot. Writing the second book has been a much different experience in trying to think about what are the differences between the two books and what are the affinities. So we'll see. Hopefully they will feel like I have no doubt that they will feel like they are both my children, which is great, but they're very different tones, different subjects. So we'll see.
So your office experiences come into play in the book, truly, but as far as, and I keep going back to this, the relationships with her family, I mean, where did those stories come from? The relationship with the mother, the relationship with the stepmother. That sauna scene was hilarious, but at the same time, so true, because I'm a stepmom. I had a stepmom. Like, I know all of those dynamics, and you're in places where you don't want to be because you're supposed to play the role. And I read that chapter and I just was laughing, and I thought, oh boy, so where did all that come from?
It's interesting. Both my parents are still living. I will own up to the fact that I think Audrey's relationship with her mother was influenced by a friend of mine who lost her mother probably when she was about 30 in circumstances that left a lot of things unresolved. And so that place of, again, that life happens. You don't always have the opportunity to wrap things up nicely before somebody passes. That to me felt like a really powerful place to be. As far as family dynamics, I have 2 older sisters, so I know all about those kind of dynamics. And I have friends who've had step parents who I've heard a lot about those challenging dynamics. In fact, I think there's a line in this book that I carried with me from one of my friends who whose parents were going through a divorce. Her mother remarried and sat her and her sisters down and said, look, I've had one failed marriage before. You are not going to sabotage this for me. If you're going to make me choose between you and my new husband, I'm going to pick my new husband. And I, as a 15-year-old, that was a knife in the heart for my friend. And gosh, I hope her mother doesn't read this book, because I'm sure she will remember that conversation. But family, it's the same with the workplace environment. You don't necessarily get to pick the people that you're thrown together with. And there's all sorts of static and electricity and bouncing off of people that comes from not choosing the people that you're around. And stepmothers happen to be one of those.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Does anyone else have any questions for Amy, or should I move over to asking you guys questions, the audience?
I have just one comment. I come from a town that has a superstar who came out of my town. It was not James Gandolfini. It's Captain America. It's Chris Evans. And that's who I pictured through this whole. Jamie looked exactly like Chris Evans, and he was a couple years ahead of my son in school, and we saw him in school plays. And whenever he comes home to visit his mom, who still lives in the town, people are very respectful of him. It's not like, oh my gosh, I don't think he has a daughter to bring to buy bagels with or whatever. But I do remember my son, when he was working at Blockbuster, and he came home one day and he said, Chris Evans and Jessica Alba were in to rent some movies. His heart was like, he was not so excited about Chris Evans because he knew Chris Evans through school, but Jessica Alba was, I guess, who Chris Evans was dating at the time. But anyway, I did not picture James Gandolfini at all.
No, I know. That was James Gandolfini just happened to be the seed. Jamie turned out to be somebody completely different.
He turned out to be Chris Evans. I'm sorry.
Chris Evans, pretty much. Yeah. The superhero kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps a little shallow in Jamie's case.
Well, here's a question that I'm interested to hear what you guys think. To what extent do you think Audrey's apathy is her own versus a product of her environment, both in her work and personal life?
To what percent did you say?
To what extent? Like, do you?
Oh, to what extent?
Yeah.
Yeah, a pretty lengthy extent. I think the apathy is pretty much all on her. That's just my opinion.
That was my take on kind of her characterization. Not to say that like her circumstance didn't shape that in some way or form, but I think it was a lot like her as a person, just her personality. And then that probably was amplified by circumstances more so.
Yeah. Apathy is a good word, but that wasn't the word that occurred to me while I was reading it. I just pictured her more as a drifting soul. She sort of, what happened. She wound up in this job. I'm sure when she was in college, she was not saying, oh, when I get my degree, I want to go work for an academic publisher, and deal with pompous professors who write, pompous books. Or
don't.
Or don't. She seemed to be very directionless and lacking in goals, but basically content with her life as it was. So I didn't see it, and maybe it is apathy, but to me it just seemed more like she was, I won't say she was the feather floating through Forrest Gump, but she was just floating on the current, see wherever she ended up and making the best of it. That's how I saw her anyway.
Yeah, I feel like there was I don't know, I feel like she's just gone through a lot of stuff that has just kind of made her be like, like if I put too much like power and meaning into this, then it's just gonna unravel my life. Like with the affair, like if she really thought about it, I'm sure she would totally be upset thinking about, oh well, I feel so bad for the woman, blah blah. But because I feel like she's just kind of like piling everything and like setting it aside not to deal with it until like she absolutely has to. And I feel like that goes into like where her like sense of self kind of is, or where her apathy for the most part comes from.
Yeah, it's interesting because you did do a little bit of a magic trick here. I bring up magic tricks a lot during these sessions, but that's one of the reasons why I actually acquired these books. And but it's really hard to make an apathetic character a sympathetic character. That's a challenging thing, and I think the reason why it works is because there were so many things that actually we knew mattered to her. She just wasn't letting herself, completely engage in those things. But we could feel that she was being affected by them. You could feel that they actually made a difference. Her relationships were meaningful to her, even if she was trying to be cool about them. But it is a very, very difficult thing to do. And I found it right. I remember the first time I read the manuscript, I liked her instantly, and I wouldn't normally like somebody who was as unengaged as she is.
Yeah. Well, I think it was very I think it was very honest when I how people can sometimes find themselves not realizing how much time is passing. Like me as the narrator, I can look at Audrey and say, you're wasting your time. Like you're in your 30s. You gotta do something. You gotta do something. But when you're in it, and for Audrey, who's she says, I've got a steady paycheck, I've got a comfortable life. Maybe this is all there is. Thankfully things happen that kick her out of that world and shake it up for her. But I think I think it's very easy for people to not think about how much time is passing, how quickly it is. And maybe that's the nature of, the age that I'm at right now, and looking back on my 30s and thinking, wow, maybe there was a little more you could have done.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it's the comfortability aspect too. Like so many people don't change or do anything because they're comfortable. So like even though she might strive for something else or like want a job that she like genuinely really enjoys as opposed to like more of a monotonous one. But yet like so many people just stay where they are because they're comfortable, and change is scary. But and I feel like she's 100% one of those people. Like she just kind of wants everything to work out like fluidly, and like it'll work out if she doesn't pay too much attention to it. And then probably the last question. What do you guys imagine is ahead for Audrey and Pooter within both within their relationship with each other and also as individuals?
I don't think that they'll probably talk to each other much anymore. That's just me speaking from experience because I'm a lot older than you are, Elizabeth. So I would say, that might be, of course, this is clearly before the age of Facebook and Instagram, where you can kind of find everybody that you ever knew in your lifetime. But I don't think their relationship will probably progress. I think for her, to be honest, in the ending, when it talks about her working at the diner, and can I just say, first of all, thank you for the diner scene, because I feel like diner scenes are the universal economic equalizer. Everybody on the planet goes to diners, and diner scenes are amazing. I love diner scenes. So I was super happy to have that scene and to find out later that she ended up working there. So I feel like she's going to meet more people in that diner than she probably ever met in her office. That's just me.
Yeah. Good point.
I think she's going to find something she's passionate about. I think she's kind of had her life shaken up enough that she's going to be, searching for that ultimate position that maybe she won't make a lot more money, but she'll feel more fulfilled in, less kind of dragging her feet along. And I'm happy for her for that. And I agree. I don't think her and Pooter will have the same dynamic or relationship. I could see them being, kind of like those friends that text each other like, oh yeah, let's get together one of these days. But then it just kind of stays like that. And then they don't develop that meaningful relationship again, which is a little bit sad because I really like their dynamic, but I think that's kind of over for them.
I think she's going to be really happy at the diner because it's doing something completely different from what she was doing at the publishing house, where she was not particularly happy. And it was in that diner scene, which, you know, I agree with Sylvia, it was a great scene where she blows up at that woman. And like that was a moment of real passion for her, real, you know, she was more passionate about that, you know, her rage about that than she ever was with Dan in bed. I mean, that was where her passion blossomed, in the diner. I could just see her learning how to make really good pie crusts and becoming their, you know, their pastry chef, and maybe ending up owning the diner at some point down the road.
Yeah, I feel like there's definitely some clarity that she's going to be getting from like jumble up of her life. I'm not really sure where she would love to be long term, because I'm surprised that she went from working in like an academic more esque setting to a diner, which is like two different worlds. But I feel like she needs that to figure out where she fits into it. Yeah. And it is 2 o'clock. Any last thoughts?
I do want to ask Amy one question. I'm a person who reads acknowledgments and author's notes, and I read your little note about was it your parents that gave you back your rent money for your MFA?
Did, yes. Yep.
That's pretty cool. That's
Yep.
pretty cool.
Yep.
That's good parenting right there.
Yeah, it was one of my more emotional moments with my parents, who are very, you know, usually very kind of straight-laced. And the night before I packed up the car and drove from New Jersey to Utah, they gave me the check at dinner, and I lost it, totally lost it.
As long as you didn't lose the check. That's what I should tell you, Amy, my nephew he has an MFA from Vermont College, I think, but he got his PhD in English at University of Utah. And I asked him if your paths had crossed. He said your name did not sound familiar to him. His name was Jacob Paul, but he's written a few novels and is a professor now. But
excellent.
You know, he much to my amazement, he loved Utah, even though he's a nice Jewish boy from New York. You know, he really
nice Jewish girl from New Jersey, and you know, the fact that he ended up in Vermont and I'm living in Vermont now.
I know. I said, you must know each other. He said, no, I've never heard this name, but thanks for the recommendation of the book. I'll look for it.
Remind me, say what's his name again?
Jacob Paul, Paul.
Right. I'll do some of my own sleuthing.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it. And thanks, Amy, so much for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you all. It's been super fun.
All
Thanks,
right.
Good book. Thank you so much.
Bye. Have a great rest of your day, guys.
Okay. Bye.